water makers, by my experience, they work well, but they can also break down quite easily. So it's not best to count on them.
No showering, no baths. Really.
Yeah.
That funk level must have been through the roof.
The funk level was pretty terrible. And then you only had a little bit of storage space too. That was another problem. Was we lived in sort of kind of, you could think of like a Boy Scout situation where everyone's in these little bunk beds that are 2 feet by. You had 18 inches between the mattress and the bottom of the bunk above you, and you had 2 feet of width, and you only got a little cubby that was 18 inches by 18 inches. So that's all you had for personal gear. So you kind of had to just bring less clothes and rewear them again and again and again, and that was just another layer.
And you're not washing your clothing, really, are you?
No, nobody's washing underwear or socks or anything.
Oof. So jockeys, boxer shorts, like what are you wearing there to kind of get the most last?
I got to tell you, I ended up resorting to Commando to try and get some flow going. Yeah.
You went Kramer. I'm loving it. What I always wonder on ships, especially long voyages, and I watch a lot of below deck, and these people are on like super yachts that are really nice, but they can never get along, at least on the reality show. And I wonder, like, how do you keep everyone mentally sane? How do you keep them from, starting a mutiny, and also like how do you get along? I mean, you must be like quite tolerant of people's personalities to be able to do that.
I think that the officers of our ship, because we had 30 crew members sailing the ship to California, and the officers were well experienced. The captain had a tremendous amount of experience. And I think with their experience came the experience of identifying compatible crew members and personalities that were likely to fall in line. That said, we did have one crew member who did have a complete mental breakdown on the first leg of the trip, and he had to get off the ship on our first stop.
How do you deal with that?
We're lucky for him because his mental breakdown was very internal. He just refused to leave his bunk. Fortunately, that was okay. We had another incident that happened later on in the Pacific where we almost hit a boat because of another person's sort of questionable breakdown, where he was just sort of really punishing himself and not paying attention to his job. But for the most part, everyone got along. We did have divisions. I personally was, in the book, I call myself one of the rebels, because you had this other group of diehard tall shippers who thought it was the greatest life in the world. And I thought, well, this is cool, but not that way. And so we really did constantly go head to head battling with each other. And I think that actually prank culture was the greatest method for coping with our hatred for one another.
It's the best passive aggressive way to pass the time and, not take it to the next level, I guess.
I think the officers, you have to keep everyone busy. Idle hands are very dangerous in situations with large groups. And it is, I think, when you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean, it sounds luxurious, even on the yachts that I've sailed across long distances. Giving everyone something to do is very important. It's helpful, I think, with your mind coping with the situation. Otherwise, you are sort of like on a detention. You're in a tight space that you can't get off of.
I would have a real difficult time just because my size and just, the claustrophobic nature of it all. Like I would, be worried about hitting my head on everything. And like, that would be a difficult aspect for me, and also just feeling like closed in. I would imagine it takes a certain type of personality that can handle this.
I think so, and I think that people human beings can be really incredible when it comes to adapting to situations. Yeah. And when you get out there, I think it's natural for people to want to fall into a routine and want to adapt.
Yeah.
I ended up getting one of the crew members and myself, her and myself ended up hooking up on the trip. And
I was going to ask about this sort of stuff. I was going to be like, what are the rules with hooking up and relationships on boats? That seems like you're playing with fire.
You are playing with fire, and they're sort of, when we signed on, there's this speech where you're not supposed to have romantic relationships with each other, but everyone knows that it's going to happen. And there were already a few pre-existing ones, and mine was really funny because I think if I were to define sort of my cockiest moment in my life, it would be when we had gone through this big storm and her bunk had gotten soaked, and I thought, well, I'm going to use this opportunity to just say something I never would say. And I said to her, my bunk's dry and your bunk's wet, and we're on different watches, so we only have to share it for a little bit of the day. So do you... and the funny part was I went back to the ship a year ago to go measure the size of the bunks, and that's where I know I've got so I'm 6'2" and 200 pounds. And she was probably like 5'3" and maybe like 110 pounds. But the idea of us fitting in a bunk that's only 16 inches high and 2 feet wide really just goes to show that if you want something bad enough, you'll do it.
Well, you're on a ship for a long time, so the mop and broom start to look good too. It's like just edit. Sorry, I didn't mean to be insulted or anything. I'm just saying, like, it's just you're willing to do whatever it is because you're so isolated in some ways.
I was thrilled because it happened to be I knew her from a couple of years before and had a big crush on her, and was shocked that she ended up on the boat. And what was I knew I was very lucky because there were 8 women and 22 men. And I think only 4 of the women were available, not in relationships. So I consider myself very lucky, for one, to have found some romance, and 2 was I thought it was really magical to have that opportunity to fall in love.
It's very romantic, You're on a boat.
Not a lot of people get to sail across an ocean and fall in love. And that was a special opportunity.
So I imagine it wasn't all fun and romance, though, and there were probably some pretty freaking terrifying moments, So, like, you were telling me, and I wanted you to share this story because, like, and it's in you write about it, but having to deal with like crazy weather. And how do you keep your cool during that? Like, I would be freaking out, and and then having to do things that are almost superhuman, So it was one I was hoping you can kind of retell for our listeners, because it's kind of wild. Like, this story, everyone who's listening, is like in fucking sane.
So we have 2 horrific events that the ship goes through. And when I use the word horrific, we're all here and I'm okay and everything's great. But the potential for so many things to have gone so much worse was certainly there. So on our first leg of the trip, we sailed from Newport, Rhode Island to Puerto Rico, and we departed in January. And sailing through the North Atlantic in the middle of the winter is a very bad thing to do. It's very dangerous, very hostile environment. And we had just crossed the Gulf Stream as we're making our way south. We're probably we're 300 plus miles east of North Carolina, the Outer Banks. And
that's where the graveyard of ships are. Isn't that? That's like the graveyard right there, just off of that. I mean,
that's all called the graveyard of the Atlantic right there.
Yeah.
And over 5,000 sunk ships. there. And so we ran into two lows that were colliding and ended up in hurricane conditions. It was probably peaking out where the wind was gusting up at 95 miles an hour. The waves had built to 20 to 30 feet, and it was a pretty harrowing experience because it just sort of came on so quickly. And it was my first real ocean experience where I was like, wow, this is crazy. The intensity of what's happening. People were getting sick. It got pretty dangerous. We had to turn off the electricity in the ship, and you could tell that the officers and everybody was taking this very seriously, not lightly. We were counting all of our life-saving gear, making sure all the life rafts were available. And I found out while doing my research for the book, after talking to some of my shipmates, that I think at least 5 or 6 people told me they really thought we were going to die. They were all making peace with God. So it was, but I'm going to say it's terrible. I was 21 and completely ignorant of the situation. I thought it was an absolute blast to be just powering through all of this.
Like, this is what I'm testing my metal for, you know? Like,
I mean, the wind was so strong that, you know, I'm wearing my jacket, my foul weather gear, and I've got my shirt on underneath, and you could feel the rain hitting you so hard. It felt like someone was like shooting BBs at your back.
Jeez.
And I really enjoyed, I'd say, the first half of it. I thought it was just absolutely outstanding. And then when I had to, I got asked to go aloft in the rigging with the first mate. That was when I ate an entire humble pie, maybe actually 3 humble pies.
What does that mean by going aloft?
So we had a sail come loose and unfurled. So it kind of looked like, imagine like a sheet on a clothesline in a windstorm, right? And it starts blowing out. Now that there's all this power that's catching, and we needed to roll that back up because there's maybe a perception where the more sail you put out, the faster a boat goes, and that's not true. It's kind of like a sine wave. You put more sail out in lighter winds, and it gets to a certain point, but then actually you need to start reducing sail so the boat doesn't get overpowered, and so that you still have control of it and control the situation as the energy and the waves and the wind builds. So we were at a point where we needed to have very little sail up, and unfortunately one of our biggest sails came undone. So going aloft means that we had to free climb up the rig to get up to that sail.
How tall is the rig?
120 feet.
And are you strapped to anything?
No, I didn't have to go 120 feet, but I got we got 60 feet up. That's where this sail was.
Still,
and you can't
60 feet. Are you strapped to anything, or this is just total like solo climb, like free solo, like? So
to get to where you have to get to, you can't clip into anything. So you have to free climb without any safety.
Fuck. You wearing your life vest?
No life vest. That was the other thing too, is because if you fall in the water, you're not going to get picked up in those conditions.
Yeah.
So, no life vest. And yeah, we climbed up, and we had a harness on that we quote unquote called the backbreaker, which was just a big belt, and it wrapped around your back. It wasn't a climbing harness around your legs. And when you got up to the yard is where the sail is on. It's a horizontal spar that these square sails, the top of them attached to. So then you have to get off the rigging that you free climbed up and get out onto this yard. And when you get onto this yard, you've got to walk on this rope underneath, which is kind of like walking on a jump rope that's hanging. Jeez. And that's where you clip in there onto the yard. But at the whole time, you know, the ship is like powering through these 20 to 30 foot waves, and then you've got the wind fluctuating where, you know, I think the wind constant for us kind of ended up being mostly, let's say, somewhere between 45 to 70 miles an hour. But then we'd have a squall come in, and that's when it would gust up to the 85 to 95
because 40 to 75 is no big deal. And
and so I think that's what was terrifying for me up there is we get up to the